we built this data layers, and then we built the context engineering. We use context engineering to build the agents that help understand that data layer and translates it into what we call actionable insights. So it's kind of like what actually people should be doing. And I would say today it's still very challenging. You need humans. You need humans to make decisions. You need humans to question a lot of things that come out of the AI. Our mission, we were set up to envision this future of how humans and agents collaborate seamlessly. We're all working together, we're going to 100x outcome. And the difference, I think, for an AI-first organization is that what very often has to change is workflows and the way we do things so that agents can actually amplify our output. And a lot of people don't really think a lot about that. It's kind of like, I use an agent to do some things in my work, but I don't think about, as an organization, how does my workflow change around this? And what we found was that one of the big things I think that is critical is judgment. So AI can spit out a lot of things, it can suggest a lot of things, but the difference between a power user and someone who's not great, someone who can look through all of that recommendations and figure out like, these are the right questions to ask, and these are the right recommendations to follow.
Hello and welcome to the next episode of the CTO show by TechVibe. Today we are talking with Geoffrey See, CDO of Vireo, a person who was building AI-first organization long it became mainstream. Now Geoffrey is leading the AI and digital transformation at Vireo, which is a over $1 billion roll-up, and also building the next generation AI force. Geoffrey, great to have you with us.
Yeah,
Tell
thanks,
us a
Michael.
little bit about yourself.
Yeah, so you mentioned I'm the Chief Digital Officer for Vireo. We are doing a very interesting experiment. We're basically doing a roll-up in the US. We are now doing about $700 million in revenue. But a big part of what I do as Chief Digital Officer is think about how do we apply AI, build, deploy, and manage an agentic workforce for a company. So we have an AI lab here in Vietnam, and it's super exciting to be able to build agents to drive all of our business from manufacturing to distribution to retail. And it's such an exciting journey because 16 years ago, I worked on the very first AI case at Bain, which is a very large strategic management consultancy. And that was our very first case, and it was incredible being introduced to technology then and seeing how it's evolved so much over the past 16 years.
Great. Exactly, I wanted to ask you about this. So how the current AI use at the organization looks versus this your past at Bain. What's the difference? What's the current state of AI workforce?
Yeah, so 16 years ago, when we were doing the Bain case, so we basically built the AI big data strategy for Samsung. And back then, AI was kind of it was about data turning into analytics, and then there was a machine learning element. And a lot of people think that the output of all this data is dashboards and numbers. And what we find is that for most operating teams, that is actually insufficient. So, it's ended up being very, very underutilized. It's not produced in a format that is the most effective in a workflow. And I think that's one area that LLM is able to transform the way we use data. The second part is explainability. So a lot of the machine learning models I worked with at the time and subsequently at other AI startups was basically like black box model. So, you say, hey, you should do X, you should do Y, and here's a result. And you ask anyone and they say, we kind of like, we're not exactly sure kind of why it says that. And what it turns out is that this makes it very, very hard for people to use data or use these recommendations. Because for most humans, you need some form of explainability, or you need to use it in the context of what you understand of the business instead of just a point prediction.
So no dashboard anymore, right? This is the thinking, right? So what actually, because we spoke about this AI first tech organization, what's the difference between the tech organization versus the AI first?
Yeah, so I think the big difference is that honestly, for a lot of agents and LLMs to be effective in an organization, our mission, we were set up to envision this future of how humans and agents collaborate seamlessly. We're all working together, we're going to 100x outcome. And the difference, I think, for an AI-first organization is that what very often has to change is workflows and the way we do things so that agents can actually amplify our output. And a lot of people don't really think a lot about that. It's kind of like, I use an agent to do some things in my work, but but I don't think about, as an organization, how does my workflow change around this? So one example we have is that traditionally, a lot of analytics flows to the very, very senior team, because they are the ones who have the power and the ability. They tell the analysts, like, say, hey, I need information on this. I need some analysis on this. They are going to respond to those guys. For us, we have like a retail network now of about 100 stores in the US. And for the store managers, like, they need analytics to drive their business. So for example, like, what should I be restocking today? What are the key customer experience metrics we're filling on, and what should I be doing about it? But honestly, the analysts never respond to them. But now with LLM, we have agents that are reading our data, is telling them what are the key insights they need to prioritize, and how is it going to drive the business forward, what they should be doing. And we can provide all of that analysis that traditionally only goes to the very senior team. And everyone needs data, they need analytics to support operating decisions. And today we can do it. But you need to change both, kind of in some way, the people. They need to change how they do things. You need to change this mindset that, my analytics is all about this senior team that has a very, very different skill set and a different ability, and they can consume data in a very different way.
So the answers are closer to the users, right? Within the organization,
Yeah.
The answers are coming to the people that actually do the work, and they also need not only the top management helping their work, right?
Yeah, like for me, it's like I spent early part of my career, embarrassingly, as a management consultant at Bain, and a lot of analysis we do, we are hired by the C-suite. They pay, about $500,000 a month for a small team, and we do analytics that caters to the most strategic problem the organization face. I think that today with agents, you would be building agents that does some of this analysis, is embedded into the operation of the business, and you can deliver it hopefully to everyone in the organization that needs it for their role in the organization. So in our case, for example, right, we built this data layers, and then we built the context engineering. We use context engineering to build the agents that help understand that data layer and translates it into what we call actionable insights. So it's kind of like what actually people should be doing. And the transformation there is that if I go to my CFO, he's a data nut. He's the guy who's kind of like, I'm going to torture the data. I'm going to look at all these analytics, dashboards, do calculations, do transformations to understand what's going on with the business and what we should be doing. So he has one use case. Then I go to the store manager. The store manager, he's kind of like, tell me what I need to do today. Like, I need to restock my inventory. Customers are complaining about certain things. I need to fix this. So we built a common data layer. We built a common semantic layer to understand the business. But you basically have agents that translate the data into very, very different action items for different stakeholders. And I think that's something that we can do with agents.
So we spoke about this very interesting concept of the engineering, the context, and challenging things that are usually end up with hallucination, right? We say the models hallucinate, they give some stupid answer. And how do you see it from your AI lab perspective? How you deal with those issues?
Yeah. So we need to back up a little bit. I'll give some context for what we do in Vietnam and where this aspect of what we call, I guess, quality assurance comes into play, right? Because I think it's really, really critical, and it's very different from traditional software QA. So, here's when a core part of what we do is context engineering. So you have a part that's data engineering, a part that is like kind of business analytics role, and then you have a part that's traditional software engineering. So generally, you're building this data layer. You're building so that you can actually consume the data, because that's actually what powers the LLMs to make decisions. You're building a semantic layer on top to help enable the LLM to understand the data. Then you're basically doing context engineering to figure out what context to feed an agent, and how does the agent read the data to produce an insight that's useful. Then we run into evaluations. So we have to evaluate agents, how well they're performing, and then there's a continual improvement cycle that follows after. As we build these agents, we have what a lot of people say call hallucinations. It's a very, very broad term, right? There's a lot of things that sometimes are technically hallucinations, sometimes they're not, and hallucination itself has all sorts of different issues. One of the big issues we find is that what causes hallucination is actually a very, very, very difficult problem to figure out. And part of it is also like solved through a context issue, right? So I'll give you an example. If I ask a store, I ask the AI, it's reading our data, I say, why did sales drop from January to February this year? It can look at our data, it pulls it in, it gives a bunch of metrics. Sometimes you might have issues where it pulls the wrong data. Sometimes it says like, oh, I couldn't find the right data. Sometimes it says, it gives you a reason and you're like, oh, that reason doesn't make any sense. So that's kind of the problems we see from a quality perspective. And it could be caused by all sorts of reasons, right? So one reason could be that the way a user phrased their question can be very different from how the LLM actually understands the question. So maybe they use certain terminology and it can throw off the LLM. So you can ask the same question in multiple ways and you see inconsistency in the answer, even though they are the same questions. And that is one aspect of hallucination. It's nothing in sense of, it's not like, oh, the LLM is just creating things at random. It's just understanding your question in an entirely different way to the intention of the user. It could literally be like, oh, it's making stuff up. We have done things to restrict a lot of that, but often what we find is that it's kind of like there's hallucinations sometimes where it's like, oh, I don't think I can answer this question, or I kind of pull up the wrong agent to answer the question. So those are aspects of hallucination. Or it could kind of be more like a context issue. Two things, right? On the technical side, we find that when you feed too much context, it throws off the output. So helping the LLM identify very succinctly what context is really needed to answer a question is very important. And those are things that we are experimenting with. But also kind of like from a human perspective, the LLMs are not very good at identifying context that they might be missing. So I'll give an example, like that month 1 to month 2, right? January to February, why did net sales drop? It can look at our data and it says, because we're feeding it like transaction data, they know average order value, they know customer, kind of how many customers walk in through the door, they know our operating hours. So they can maybe say things like, oh, you change your operating hours, or you ran certain promos, or your number of customers decreased. We don't know why, but it decreased. A store manager sitting in the store might know something like our competitor down the road dropped prices 30% last month. And that's kind of why we are losing traffic. So often, some people say, oh, it's hallucinating, it's not giving me great results. That's just because sometimes as humans, we actually have a lot of context that the LLM doesn't have. And that's where the context engineering piece requires a fair bit of creativity to think about how do we replicate the context that a human has, or where is it assistive to a human, and where the human element has to come in to make those judgment calls.
Absolutely amazing. I'm really impressed. And we discussed this before our recording. You briefly touched on something which immediately attracted my attention, which you called agent router, the process that it's before the agents, right? Yeah. If you can tell us more about this, it's super interesting for all technical audience.
Yeah, so routing is a super interesting issue. So the reason we needed an agent router was to solve, at some point, two problems, right? From a user perspective, we started having so many agents, and people were just like, I don't know which agent solves the problem I need to, right? I'm going to look through this whole list, and I'm like, I have no idea. So it's actually getting to be a usability problem. So that's one part of it. The other part was that you had to break up a lot of things you couldn't solve with a single agent, or it was very difficult to solve because you then have, if you try to build this master know-it-all LLM, you're squeezing so much context and instructions and knowledge files into it, and it starts being very dysfunctional. So a big part is that you kind of you solve tasks by breaking down into smaller pieces and figuring out what's the best way, who is the best agent to solve that problem. Or sometimes you might need a multi-agent workflow, where it's I need to pull one set of data, get analysis out of it, and then run another agent to tackle it. And that was what we did, building our own agent router that was kind of solving those two problems.
Thank you very much. I have a question to you regarding the deploying agents to real existing environment at scale, at multiple organizations. What surprised you there? What was the thing that you didn't foresee that you will face as a challenge, as an issue?
Yeah, that's actually that's an amazing question, because we lived and breathed this idea that how the judge of good AI is to kind of is to 100x the output of teams, or organizations, right? And the reason why we use teams and organizations and not just an individual is that in many ways, we can use AI now to increase our productivity significantly as an individual. If I'm writing stuff, it's so much faster. If I am making images, it's so much faster. But when you come as an organization, it's a lot more complex. You have an interplay of different people that needs to work together to make things happen. So you need to understand workflow. You need to understand also things like the skill profile, the user profiles of people that are using it, because we find that people use it in very different ways. And you need to figure out kind of how do you tie it into what is the organizational goal and direction. So I'll give an example, right? When we think of like the store, right? One of the things that when we came in, the key organizational goal was to enable our store managers, our general managers who run these stores in the US. Each store is basically doing about anywhere from $2 to $5 million in revenue a year. So they are not big businesses. They're not entirely like so small. That's not inconsequential. But we cannot. And it's a very local business because they need to understand their customers in the area and the promos that drive those customers and how they retain those customers. But we cannot afford a whole team to support all of them. So we built agents to provide the analytics that they need. And there are two things that we're very mindful of. One was that there was the overall culture that we're trying to build, where we're trying to empower these GMs as mini CEOs. So in a sense, we're building their team because we will not be able to afford for everyone like an entire team of like marketing analysts, data analytics and all that for each of them. But still, it's important to provide that to them. And it's part of a change in culture, right, to help us create value. The second part was that as we started rolling it out, we realized that you have to take a lot into account the skill level of people that are using it. We find that there are people who are very exploratory. They're willing to go in there, ask all kinds of questions. And I've literally seen general managers who sit there staring at the computer because, we love watching them work with this. And they're just kind of like, what do I ask? What do I say? And we found one thing that worked really, really well for us was we said, talk to it like you would talk to a normal human person. Like, what would you ask? And that just kind of became a light bulb for them. But the point there is just that people consume information in very, very different ways. And, especially as we work with operational teams, we think a lot about how LLMs assist them in their work. And it's just a huge change from traditional data analytics again, right? Where it's like, I create this dashboard and these numbers, and you kind of have to do, like, in some cases, pretty heavy lifting to understand it and figure out what the implications are for what you need to do based on your role.
This episode is brought to you by TechVibe, your one-stop IT recruitment solution provider. We connect global companies with top tech talent across Southeast Asia. Whether you're looking for permanent hires, short-term contractors, or employer of record, EOR services, we've got you covered, especially in the IT and digital sectors. Thanks for tuning in. And now, enjoy the episode.
I think from our tech audience perspective, interesting perspective on your side for the job market changes.
Yep.
So everyone is concerned that AI will hit our jobs and what we'll do as a tech people that were developing code or doing generic things.
Yep.
How all of us should prepare for the AI workforce, how we should be ready to work together, not against.
Yeah, that's an issue very, very close to my heart, right? I think, we set up an AI lab in Vietnam, and kind of a big part we had to do was to invest very heavily in one is training people to be able to handle this technology stack, both from a context engineering and traditional software engineering perspective. And in the process of doing that, we also had to figure out who is very effective in that we can retrain them very well to work very well with this technology stack and solve this kind of problems. And one thing that comes up a lot to me is judgment, right? So we actually just ran a team retreat. We have now an annual context engineering training session. We brought everyone up to the beach in Ho Tram at the Malia Resort. And we brought in basically a ex-BCG consultant who became a CEO to come and actually teach them about structured problem solving, because we felt it was so important to invest in the skill sets, because again, it's like the way LLMs solve problems is just going to be so different. And in that process, we're trying to figure out like also who generally is good at being retrained. And what we found was that one of the big things I think that is critical is judgment. So AI can spit out a lot of things. It can suggest a lot of things. But the difference between a power user and someone who's not great, someone who can look through all of that recommendations and figure out like, these are the right questions to ask and these are the right recommendations to follow. And a big part of that is also they probably have some sort of context and experience that allows them to do that really well. And I sum it up as one word: judgment. Like, how do I practice good judgment? And one of the issues that's very close to heart, we discuss about this question of like, how is it going to hit employment? I actually think our generation and the people kind of roughly around anywhere from the late 20s now to maybe the late 40s are just going to be huge beneficiary, because we have had enough experience to have developed hopefully good judgment that allows us to use AI very well, and in our case potentially build AI and agents really well, because we can tell when it's producing good outcomes and then work backwards to say what exactly do we need to train the agents so that they can produce those good outcomes. What I worry a lot about is young people. I think if I'm studying in college now and I'm graduating into this environment, it's a lot of uncertainty. If you look at statistics in the US, software programming went from the hottest major 3 years ago to now actually having one of the highest unemployment rates among graduates. And that's only because it's the area that's seen the fastest adoption of AI, and it's going to hit all the other fields very quickly in all sorts of knowledge jobs. So that is very scary to us. And one thing that we have been doing is that we've been investing and supporting some universities here with training programs. On one part to help youth prepare for this future, where we believe they'll be working a lot with agents as part of their normal job, and managing agents and creating agents. And the second part is also for us to understand how do we accelerate that process of learning good judgment so that they can do well in the future. Because I don't feel the right approach is not like, hey, learn this vocational skill set of AI, vibe coding and whatnot, right? I mean, those people have to pick those up, but the fundamental skill set is more like, how do I practice good judgment? How do I solve problems well? How do I understand and define problems? There's a lot more fundamental kind of skill sets and approaches that people need to pick up.
So the evaluation part is the key here, right? So the understanding what's the outcome, what's the value in this outcome.
Yeah.
This is something which we also briefly touched, but if you can dive a little bit, what's the shift in the mindset that people should have at the moment? As you said, not coding, but again, what's the goal? What's the one thing that I should follow to be successful?
Yeah, so I think at the moment what we've seen is that the people who do really well, you have to go out and try. You have to go out and try a lot of these things. Traditionally, I think what we find in Vietnam is that a lot of the engineers tend to be a bit more risk averse. They tend to be, I know mobile, this is like a couple of years ago, mobile development is the safe bet. I can find a job, I can build a career. And they're not necessarily like, I want to push into, I see this new tech stack that's kind of like, it's blowing up. I need to learn it. I need to see where it's going. They tend to be more like, I know this is a safe path. I will always be employed. I know how the career development looks like. Because technology is changing so quickly and it's displacing people so quickly, people need to learn quickly, and they need to go out and try. They need to go try these things, because that's the only way they'll learn and build their skills in this area and understand what's happening. So I think that's one part. The other part I think is, and I don't think we have the answer to this yet, is again, how do you build judgment in a much more accelerated manner? So if you have a good coder who's experienced, knows how to build products, and they come in and they're using AI to code, I feel like they would probably be like 5-10x more productive, because they would look at the code and they know which one is junk, which one is not, how to incorporate, and then kind of maybe even how to think about their tech stack relative to all the advances in AI, right? How exactly should I be building my software, given that AI is going to be such a big part of how we build the software. So those are the differences between, I think, people who will succeed in this world of AI, and I think a lot of people will really benefit from it. But there will also be people who will struggle because the pace of change is just so quick.
And once again, we touched the challenge for the young people, just fresh graduates, right? They don't have this experience. They cannot review pull requests from others and immediately see, oh, this is wrong, this is to be improved, right? So
it's hard, and I think I have this debate with my team because I want to support young people, but they are very frustrated with they're like, why bother hiring if you have one good context engineer who can build something that supports agents that support like 50 stores in the US, just go hire the guy who's very experienced because you don't need many of them and the output is 50x, 100x.
Or your 100x, right?
So it is a challenge, and I think it's kind of why we started supporting some of the universities, because I think it is actually quite scary. I graduated in 2008 during the global financial crisis. For the audience who are too young, it was a very scary period because all my friends who were looking for jobs couldn't get jobs. All the ones that had jobs the year before were all laid off from their jobs and competing for the same jobs that were there as people who were graduating. So I feel it can get quite scary, and I think it's important, it's not from a company perspective. I just think that it's just important for us to help people figure out how do they scale up and get there when all these traditional rungs of learning you get coming into the workforce are slowly disappearing.
Geoffrey, I know that you also have the very interesting part and knowledge in the psychedelic assisted. And tell me how this influenced the work in the AI centric teams. How those two words connect.
Yeah. So you touch on a topic that's just very close to my heart. So I recently got my certification as a psychedelic assisted therapist in Australia, where psychedelics have been legalized and approved for the treatment of certain mental health issues. And I've always been very interested in the space because of two things, right? One is that, when you go through a psychedelic journey, you experience, heightened meaning, heightened spiritual awareness. And it helps you interpret the world in a very different way. And I think it helps you understand a bit more what it means to be human. And I think as AI does a lot of the logical thinking that humans are great at doing, or the reasoning that we're great at, I think it's a lot more important to also just remind ourselves of what it means to be human, right? What it means to have meaning, have purpose, have goals, have dreams. I think those are very important things. The second part, actually, on a more technical levels, when I was doing the training program, we had people who ran the clinical trials at Imperial College, who ran the clinical trials at Johns Hopkins University, running our training session. And when you think about how the mind works in psychedelics, it actually kind of changes a lot of ways of how you think about AI models. So one example is that in the brain, there's something called the default mode network. So traditionally, it's as we get older, our default mode network becomes more, it makes us more rigid in our thinking. We have heuristics. The heuristics are in some way good. They're very efficient. So if I see a problem, I'm not thinking what's the first principles, right? More often I'm doing pattern matching and I'm saying, I've seen this before. So therefore, this is the answer. So we actually shortcut that process and we kind of give an answer, even though we think we are being logical and reasoning it out. When you think of AI models, LLMs are essentially pattern matching. They're here's a bunch of tokens. Here's the tokens that I guess people expect to see come out of it. And that is one way of building AI. So if you see Yann LeCun, who just left Meta, and his argument was that this is a dead end. It's not going to get us to AGI. So he's pushing for what he calls a worldview model, where you build certain principles and understanding of how the world works, how things relate to each other. And through that, you're able to kind of process new information. And the way I read that is kind of more as a human, I have my default mode network and I build heuristics over time. Some of these heuristics work well, sometimes they don't. But so they can both be a benefit and a bias. You look at how a kid approaches a problem. Everything is very new to them. They can do the same thing 20 times a day, 50 times a day, because it is all very new to them each time. So in a way, you can kind of think about AI models too as hey, which ones are kind of on psychedelics, which ones are not, right? Because when you're on psychedelics, your default mode network kind of it loosens up the rigidity there, your neurons are connecting in very different patterns. So you actually look at things in a very different way. And so I kind of think of it as like, hey, I have this worldview model, I have this LLM model, and in some way that reflects like, oh, brains on psychedelics and brains not on psychedelics.
You briefly touched on the general AI. Do you think we are close to it? What's your prediction?
It requires people much more deep in the space. I look at it, from the context of our work and how useful it is within an organization for people trying to achieve the things they need to. And I would say today it's still very challenging. You need humans. You need humans to make decisions. You need humans to question a lot of things that come out of the AI. You need humans to get the AI to actually do certain things very well. So from that perspective, it's just not there, right? And it's hard for me to see it. It can do certain micro tasks very well, and you can piece it together to approximate certain things reasonably okay. But generally, it's still very far from replacing humans. How fast we will get there, that's a very difficult question, right? If I give you a prediction, I'm just bullshitting. But what I can say is that there are many, I think it raises a lot of interesting things of how humans make decisions, and we see it in our work. That is very interesting, right? So one example is that sometimes people say, hey, this model is hallucinating. What they sometimes mean is just like, it had a very different logic of thinking about a problem than I had. That's what they're saying, right? We have periods where we look at it and we say, hey, like we have someone very senior come in and say, I definitely know the reason why sales dropped from last quarter to this quarter. And AI gives something entirely different. And at first, his first reaction is like, whoa, it's hallucinating. Then as we dive deeper, he's kind of like, oh, actually, it's a very different person. It's valid. I can see why it thinks that way. I need to digest, and it's surprising to me. And it's actually interesting. And when we think of how humans make decisions, there's this book I read some time ago called The Righteous Mind. And it says, for example, we use emotion as a very powerful filter for how we make decisions. Very often we have made a decision, then we explain it logically. But that's not actually how the mind works. So when you think of how the AI works, right? I remember listening to a podcast recently by Ilya Sutskever, who was the chief scientist for OpenAI before he left. And he was talking about the same thing. He was saying like, one of the things he thinks a lot about is the role emotions play in humans making decisions and how it actually helps us potentially make better decisions. We think of emotions as irrational, but maybe they are actually doing things that is so critical for decision making. And the problem with the AI is because they don't have that, that is why their decision making looks so weird to a human sometimes. So they're a very interesting question that all of this raises for us.
So the AI, general AI, is not that important in our work. So if you come in 5, 10 years, 15 years, we still have built so many impressive things, right? And
yeah, I mean, I think AGI is a very broad term. It's a very ambiguous goal. I think if you can do, like, say, I don't know, like, be a management consultant that does 70% of the work that a management consultant does today, that is a really like incredible and world-changing, right? That's a very hard thing to do. We don't have to wait for AGI for everything to change. I think even just getting there is going to be crazy what the implications are for humanity, for society, for education, for young people.
Thank you very much, Geoffrey, for sharing all of this with our audience. It is appealing to me. I'm sure that our audience will love your insight into the future of how we use AI and how the AI is backing organization. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks for having me.